Welcome to the second module of our Open Science course, Open Access, All That Glitters Is Not Gold. My name is Max Heber and I'm a member of the University of Konstanz Open Science team. This module was produced by my colleagues Martina Benz and Andreas Kirchner. We will start with a short definition of open access. What does open access mean and how did the idea of open access come about? To understand open access, we will have to take a closer look at the scientific publication system, how it works and what changes and challenges come up with open access. Second, we will give you practical advice on how to find open access publications in online search engines. What is open access? In short, we can say open access means the free and immediate access to academic literature on the internet. The most common definition of open access comes from the so-called Budapest Declaration. It was published in 2002 following the first meeting of the Budapest Open Access Initiative, an interdisciplinary initiative of European and American researchers with the aim of making scientific results freely available to the public. I quote, "By open access to this literature, we mean its free availability on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full texts of these articles, crawl them for indexing, pass them as data to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose, without financial, legal, or technical barriers." The opposite of open access is closed access. This means that content is accessible only after a fee or owning a subscription. Why is open access a good idea? There are a number of arguments in favor of open access. These include open access allows free and public access to research results and other academic publications for everybody. This means doctors can access articles freely as well as their patients, lawyers, and journalists as well as citizens. This is also a question of fairness. When academic research is financed through public funds, why not granting free access to its results? There are many good reasons for open access. For example, articles published in open access are more visible for other researchers, which results in more citations. Open access speeds up scientific exchange and interdisciplinary collaboration, resulting in more innovation. Also, researchers maintain the rights over their own articles. And last but not least, open access ensures a fair and transparent use of taxpayers' money. With so many advantages, why are not all academic publications open access? Let's take a look at the scientific publication system. How does it work? At the beginning is step 1. A scientist does their research, writes up their results, and wants to publish them in a research journal that is read by peers and the community. Academic journals serve as means of communication among researchers. Through publishing, a scholar becomes visible to the scientific community. Other scientists or scholars can refer to their results or, for example, follow up on their results in their own research. Also, publications serve to evaluate scholars. Publishing articles in prestigious journals qualifies a scientist or scholar as excellent and is a precondition for the next career step in academia. This is why our researchers send their manuscript, which is the second step, to the publisher of a prestigious journal. What happens next? The publishing house transfers their manuscript to other scholars, which is step 3, for review. The review process guarantees the quality of academic publishing. There are still misunderstandings about the quality of open access publications. However, as we will see later, open access publications run through the same or even more advanced peer review processes as non-open access publications. In the peer review process, other researchers from the same field read the manuscript and decide whether it will be accepted, must be rejected, or if it needs to be revised. If the latter is the case, the reviewers often comment the manuscript and make suggestions for revision. During the review process, the publisher informs the author about the results of the interview. When the article is, sometimes after a few rounds of revisions, accepted, the article is published in a research journal. For a long time, this used to be in print, which means the publisher summons several articles in one issue and delivers it physically to libraries and other subscription owners. These journals could then be accessed through libraries, where users could read them, work with them, make copies, and take notes. Today, all this is usually being done electronically. The big problem with this system, however, is that only scientists whose library subscribes to the journal have access to the published article. It is important to know that the authors are usually not paid for writing their articles, neither are the reviewers reimbursed for reviewing manuscripts. This means every publication is publicly funded 3 times. The authors are paid by the public, so are the reviewers. In the end, academic libraries have to buy the publications again with public funds. Because these published research results are already publicly funded 3 times, it makes sense that they are openly available to the public. So, how does open access work and how does it change the publishing system? Basically, there are 2 ways of open access, green and gold. Green open access means that publications that were first published by a publisher, for example in a journal, are republished or self-archived in an institutional or disciplinary repository. This way, publications that were at first closed become open access. When publications are published open access right away, for example in an open access journal or as an open access book, we call this gold open access. One note on the term APC. In many cases, authors have to pay charges, so-called article or book processing charges, because publishers finance their services through these fees. This can be problematic, because not all authors have access to funds to cover these publications fees that can be as high as 5,000 euros for an article in a high-ranking science journal. APCs or BPCs, that is, book processing charges, also create problems for libraries that have to manage funding and face rising costs. Therefore, other modules of financing open access have been developed to avoid these publishing charges. Open access without APC or BPC, and this is the 3rd way of open access in addition to the conventional 2, is called diamond open access. Instead of charging individual authors for publishing their articles or books, diamond open access works, for example, through collective financing of journals, book publishing, or publishing platforms by libraries and research institutions. In some European countries, there are publicly funded publication platforms, for example, Open Edition or Open Edition in France, which allows such diamond open access publishing free of charge. Other modules are, for example, the Open Library of Humanities that is financed through a library membership module. You may have come across other modules, such as hybrid open access, in which individual articles can be bought free from subscription-based journals. When we look again at the publishing system, we see that with open access, processes of quality control, the review process, remain the same. What has transformed with the change from closed to open access is the money flows. Whereas publishing has previously been financed through the selling of subscriptions, it is with gold open access usually through paying APC or BPCs. Diamond open access can ultimately be seen as a variety of gold open access. Here too the difference lies in funding. APCs and BPCs, which make it difficult for authors without the necessary financial means to publish, are replaced, for example, by library consortia that jointly provide funding. For the authors, publishing is then free of charge. Green open access can also be a cost-effective alternative to paying APCs and BPCs. Here, formerly closed publications are republished in institutional or disciplinary repositories. This may be the published, accepted, or submitted version of an article. Depending on the legal framework and the publisher's policy, green open access may be accompanied by an embargo. The share of open access publications has been growing constantly over the last 20 years. Whereas there has been resistance by publishers for many years, more and more publishing houses have now transformed their business modules within academic publishing. The pressure to act has increased because research funders such as the Wellcome Trust, JISC, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also the European Union and many European national research organizations do meanwhile require that research results achieved with their funding are published in open access. It is therefore advisable for academics to familiarize themselves and in general with the various possibilities of open access publishing. To accelerate the open access transformation, several national and private funding organizations, together with the European Research Council and Science Europe, started Plan S. The aim is that, I quote, all scholarly publications on the results from research funded by public or private grants provided by national, regional, and international research councils and funding bodies must be published in open access journals on open access platforms or made immediately available through open access repositories without embargo. Many universities and other higher education institutions are also positioning themselves on open access, developing strategies and practical measures to implement OA. This includes, for example, signing important declarations and calls like the Berlin Declaration, DORA, or Science Europe's Action Plan for Diamond Open Access. We provide the links to these initiatives at the end of the presentation. Furthermore, open science policies that encourage scholars to choose open access publishing options can be adopted. In order to promote the green road of open access, the establishment of institutional repositories is suitable. To foster gold and diamond open access, it is recommended that funds be made available to finance articles in open access journals and books. Establishing one's own publication services or even one's own open access university press can be an effective means. The provision of advice and consulting on all aspects of open access is essential for the researchers at your institution. And last but not least, participation in research projects on open access can also contribute to the success of fair and sustainable open access. Towards the end of this module, we would like to show you a few helpful online search engines for finding open access publications or repositories to publish in open access. First, there is the BASE search engine, which diligently collects everything that is open access. Here you can currently find over 300 million documents in full text. OpenDoor is a search engine that allows you to find repositories. More than 5,900 document servers are currently listed here. The Directory of Open Access Journal lists over 18,000 open access journals with appropriate quality assurance and no embargo periods. All in all, more than 7.7 million articles can already be found there. Finally, the Directory of Open Access Books contains over 58,000 scholarly books. Of course, most publications are also accessible through Google or Google Scholar, but it doesn't have to be Google. Local catalogs of academic libraries also contain open access publications via standardized interfaces and are very helpful for research. We have also compiled some helpful links to the services, tools, sponsors, and initiatives mentioned, which are clickable in the slides. Finally, you will find the list of resources and illustrations here. We reached the end of this module. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your attention.